Well, hello, sports fans. It's Larry Eder with RunBlogRun. We're with Stuart Weir. This is week 2 of the Athletic Chat, and where we take 4 topics, try to solve the athletics problems, or cite great moments in athletics. Today's the 85th anniversary of Jesse Owens setting 4 world records in 45 minutes. And I just wanted to remind you of those records, and then we'll go on. 100 yards in 9.4 equaled the world record. Long jump, 8.13 meters. Then he went 20.3 for a 200-meter, 220-yard, which had a straight and then a turn. And then he went 22.6 over the 200-meter hurdles. I never got to meet Jesse. I've met people. My editor, James Dunaway, who passed away in 2014, found him fascinating, told me great stories about him. Seemed like a very complicated individual and one of the finest athletes of all times. We've just posted a piece on our site from Chris Turner, the man who does director of Heritage at World Athletics. Chris is one of the biggest track geeks in the entire world. He has an obsession with all things Finnish. He even uses 1924 Normie as his Twitter feed. Guy's a geek. And I love him. And we first started talking in 95 about javelin stuff. I don't think this guy's ever seen a javelin competition he didn't like. I think he's half finished. Anyway, he's in charge of the historical department at World Athletics. Check out the piece today on Jesse Owens. Okay, so from that, we're going to move on. Stuart, how are things going in the lovely United Kingdom?
Nothing has changed a great deal. Politically, the Prime Minister is having a bit of trouble with people wanting to sack one of his advisors. But, you know, I think probably in the States you've had 1 or 2 of situations like that.
Just a few, yes. Our politics it changes hourly in the United States, you know, from one state to another. I'm in Wisconsin now. I go to California on Wednesday, and I will be staying in my parents' home and trying to be by myself for about 14 days, which will be kind of interesting. But so we'll be doing things from California. I wanted to talk to you about several things. I haven't heard much about our friend Mo Farah. Anything new on him?
I haven't really heard anything because, of course, he made the big decision to stop doing track and only run on the roads.
Yeah.
When he didn't win anything, really, he made the decision to go back and run in this year's Olympics on the track. But then, unfortunately, this year's Olympics, as we know, is not happening.
Yeah.
So I don't quite know where that leaves him. Leaves him, whether he will attempt to do a fall marathon, assuming there are any.
Yeah.
Because I have, again, doubts as to whether the Marathon can take place.
What do you think is happening there? Because, Hugh Brazier is trying to be transparent. I appreciate he's had a very difficult thing. But as you and I know, the London Marathon is much more than just 200 elites.
Yes.
And you guys have made it this festival of running. Marathons in the U.S., even though a lot of them are older than London, have modeled themselves poorly after the way London's done things. Will people even, BBC gives it, 6 hours live?
Yes.
Will people even watch it if it's just a couple hundred elite guys racing?
Well, it's a totally different event because if you stand on Tower Bridge, for example, you can literally see people passing you for probably 4 or 5 hours.
Yes. Yep.
Whereas really, you and I have watched elite championship marathons, and you have sort of 50 runners, and they're past you, and then if you're staying in that position, your day's over.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is that will spectators even be allowed to watch it? Because it'll be social distancing, I would have thought, because the reason that there's a question of whether the marathon can take place as for the multitudes is you can't do social distancing. And so I think you cannot have spectators crowded the way they are normally, sort of 10 deep on the main vantage point. So whether it would work financially, I mean, as you say, one of the great things about London is that it raises millions for good causes.
Mm-hmm.
And, whether it would be as attractive a TV spectacle, who knows? Certainly in soccer, television is renegotiating all the contracts by saying, well, actually, we agreed to have soccer games in the winter on Saturday afternoons and Sunday afternoons, and now you're offering them to us in June on Tuesday evenings. And actually, that doesn't work as well for us. So can we have $300 million back, please?
Yes, that sounds like, I understood that BBC is renegotiating with UK Athletics, and they had a lovely deal for many years.
Yeah.
And I remember 4 or 5 years ago, Ian Stewart telling me, who was then with UK Athletics, that he thought BBC was going to become tougher and tougher down the road to negotiate with unless they kept the entertainment value up of the events. And that's what it's about. Sports is entertainment. One of the things I am seeing, I just did a Zoom conference with Clayton Murphy, the 2016 U.S. kid who got the bronze in the 800. And he's moving from Oregon to Ohio. He's going back to his college coach. His girlfriend and him are moving. And, he had been with Alberto's group and all that kind of stuff. We did a 30-minute, and I see more and more how talented some of these young athletes are. And we've known that because think about how many athletes work so well with you when we do interviews, and there's some that really, really do a nice job. Our writer in Kenya, Justin Lagat, had an issue last week, and I wanted to ask you if you'd ever experienced this. He set up an interview with a world champion. They followed up a couple times. He went to call the person. They went dark for a week. Not a comment, not an email, not a tweet. And I know I've had it a few times. He got a little frustrated and wrote a piece about how, especially in this time of the coronavirus, if you're going to keep the value up of your brand, being an athlete, the least you can do is talk to the media, or put things together. Have you had athletes who tell you they're going to do something and kind of blow you off?
Occasionally, but not that often, really. I think compared to other sports, track and field athletes are lovely people to talk to and very reliable.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm trying to think. I think there's only a handful of people that have ever kind of blown me off after setting something up, or their agents had set it up, And even the agents, you got to thank them for a lot of the times. They get it better than sometimes than the athletes do.
Yeah.
They've got to go out and...
I have been told by American athletes that because baseball, what you call football, and basketball are so big, it's a challenge for track and field to get the publicity. So therefore, U.S. track and field tell athletes, if you want to continue making a living, you've got to do your media stuff. Yeah.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. If you were going to talk to a group of young athletes, what are the 3 things that you would tell them to include in an interview when they're talking to you?
Oh, that's an interesting one. 3 things that the athlete should say, talk about.
Yeah.
I'm always interested in how people train, whether there's something different. Like I remember when I was talking to Dalilah Muhammad, she mentioned that they had done more 800s in the training, and then suddenly she goes out and breaks the world record twice.
Yeah.
So, it's just interesting that that's something you change in your training.
Sure.
And Natoya Gould told me that she had started taking her long runs more seriously and timing them, rather than just doing them for the sake of doing them madly. So I'm always interested in something that people have done to change their training. Some athletes are brilliant at bringing their sponsor into everything they do.
Yes.
And of course, those are the ones who continue to get sponsored.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone who follows Shelley Ann on social media notices this, how Grace Foods constantly appear in everything.
Yeah.
And therefore she's good value for them, and they pay her well, and she gives them value. So I think that that would be. At the moment, I'm asking everyone, how are you coping with lockdown?
Sure.
What kind of training are you doing? And perhaps reactions to the postponement of the Olympics.
Yeah.
And, some people are saying, I'm devastated because I want to retire. Others are saying, well, actually, I'm just coming back from an injury, so another year will help me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
no, I mean, I'm fascinated with that. The three that I've been doing that seem to get the most positive response. One is I asked them, what's the biggest mistake they made while they were juniors or in American high school in track? I asked them, what's the biggest change from becoming a U.S. collegiate athlete to going pro?
Yeah.
And for a long time, so few American athletes kept the same coach for a long time.
Yeah.
They had one coach in high school, one in college. And I remember about 1979 reading that Seb Coe was coached by his father.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was starting to meet European athletes, and they'd had the same coaches since they were 12 or 13.
Yes.
I was going, wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well,
and, I had the same coach for 8 years, collegiate and post-collegiate, and it made a big difference because it takes a while for you to get used to somebody, and Clayton Murphy today, he's been with Alberto for 2 years, and then that group was disbanded. And he checked out stuff on the West Coast, but decided to go back to Ohio, and he's going to his college coach. And I asked him, well, is that going to be hard? And he said, well, we kept in touch. And
this is really interesting. I like to respond in different ways.
Sure.
First of all, Dan Pfaff.
Yeah.
When he worked in the UK, which he did for about 3 or 4 years, he told me that changing coaches in America is no big deal. Whereas in the UK, if an athlete, if I'm coaching an athlete and they want to go to you, I'm likely to call you up and accuse you of poaching my athlete.
Wow.
And people get very defensive about it.
Yeah.
But because track and field is not a big college sport over here, very few colleges would have a top coach. So therefore, the way Americans go back to their college coach, it just doesn't happen with us.
Now, that takes me to a question. I knew Dan Pfaff, a highly respected coach. Raina Reiner, highly respected coach.
Yes.
And under, the gentleman that was the performance director before Neil, who's now in the Netherlands, I thought he brought in Pfaff and also
Charles von Comedy.
Yeah, and Charles was a strange duck. I remember going to a few meets. I just wanted to watch him in operation, and I sat in the stands and I'm taking notes. And he actually came over to me and asked me what I was doing, and I said, "Well, I'm trying to figure out what makes you tick." And he kind of smiled and went on his way. And a couple times I saw him in the American term I would use is unbridled, not giving a shit if anybody heard anything or not. I was fascinated with him because I thought he was very precise. But I thought his job was to get the best coaches he could for UK athletics, and that legacy continues to live on. Yeah. But the crap I heard from British coaches about them hiring Faf, them hiring Reina especially, and then I understand jealousy because you see it in the U.S. too. You have a good athlete, and there's more over here. There's issues with the college coaches and their agents when the kids go post grad. That's part of the sport that hasn't got to that professional level yet. Do you think that an elite athlete needs a coach?
I mean, it's interesting that there are some athletes who are self-coached, but probably most of the they're not the most successful ones usually.
Sure.
Yeah, I just got to say something there. You're talking about how British athletes often stay with their coach forever. Interesting that Dina Asher-Smith met John Blackie when she was, I think it was 10 years old.
Wow.
And at a time when she was just a little girl who wanted to run a little bit.
Yeah.
And nobody had any idea whether she'd be any good or not. But it's interesting that they have stayed together.
Yeah.
And I mean, Dina would say the thing with John is that if I win an Olympic gold medal, if I win a world championship gold medal, he celebrates it. But if a 16-year-old has run a PR in a local meet, he celebrates that just as much at the next training session.
That's cool.
But it's interesting because you see, no one really had heard of John Blackie before Dina reached the elite.
Yeah.
And but I mean, she had just taken the view, it's working, so why change it?
Yeah. No, she's
I was going to say, there was a time when British athletics decided, I mean, at one stage they had about 4 elite centres around the country, like Lee Valley in London, Loughborough and Bath, and they decided they wanted everyone to come to Loughborough.
Yeah.
Loughborough is a small university town with a university which specialises in sport. Okay. And then some of the big athletes like Jess Ennis says, well, actually, I live in Sheffield. My family live in Sheffield. My coach lives in Sheffield. So I will not be moving to Loughborough. And in the end, with the top athletes, they really couldn't persuade them. With the next tier down, there's a thing that they have which talks. It's called money.
Yes.
And so they were able to induce quite a lot to come to Loughborough just by saying, well, look, your funding might get cut if you don't come to Loughborough. This is where we want you to be. But I mean, that has, I think, been a limited success. But it did a strange thing because athletes in the UK tend to have their own personal coach. Okay. So therefore the influence of a Neil Black when he was alive, or Stephen Maguire on them is fairly limited. And in a way he's almost supporting their coach.
Sure.
Rather than actually having... so it's an interesting one. I mean, something that worked really well was Eilidh Doyle, who was for years coached by Malcolm Arnold. Malcolm Arnold, who coached Colin Jackson, etc.
Yeah.
And then Eilidh married Brian Doyle, and Brian has now become her coach. But for 2 or 3 years, Malcolm allowed Brian to coach, but stayed in the background and coached Brian to coach Eilidh.
Wow, that was brilliant.
That was a nice arrangement.
Let's go back to something you just said, money.
Yes.
One of the things that I think the UK does well is the way you've done these relays. You take care of your relay athletes. They seem very, very close. And they, I thought they were going to get 4 medals in Doha, and they they're delivering. And in a lot of ways, they're delivering. In the U.S., we either hit or miss. We either get it or we don't. And
yeah, but I mean, go on.
And I think that, and I'm not sure which is better. The French had a 4x1 relay team back in 1991 or 92 that broke the world record for the 4x1 that Carl Lewis, Leroy Burrell were on the Santa Monica Track Club team. And they did it with 4 guys who had trained together for 4 years, and none of them had broken 10.08. But guess what they did? They got that baton around,
Yeah, yeah.
And even at American high schools, while the kids practice relays, it's kind of a last-minute thing,
Yeah.
And it's one thing to change stuff on a 4x4. It's a big deal to change a 4x1.
Yeah, I mean, I have just sent you a piece for RunBlogRun on Des Bryant, and in that he says that the girl that she passed the baton to in Doha, she reckons that they had done that twice because they hadn't had any relay practices. And people change at the last minute and so on. But you see, with the British team, we fund the relays, and basically you're told, if you are a GB relay, you're told, we are putting a team in the Penn relays, and you've got to go to that.
Okay.
We're putting a team in the Zurich Diamond League, which has a relay, and you've got to go to that. I don't care what else you think you would like to be doing that weekend. That's where you're going to be.
Okay.
And they will have also 1 or 2 relay camps where they practice and practice and practice. And the thinking is simply, we are not as fast as Tory Bowie, English Gardner, etc. But if we can get the changes so slick, we can make up the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And if we can put our runners in the right order, so that perhaps we can just get ahead of the American, boom.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the Jamaicans don't practice their relay squads, but then they say, "Well, look, we've been running relays since we were in elementary school, and so it's just second nature how you do it."
No, I don't know what I mean. My late editor, James Dunaway, did a story that I'll repost. He went back and looked at every American relay from 1912 to 2008 and reminded me of when batons were dropped, and when they weren't. And it was almost like 40% of the time we dropped batons.
Yeah.
And, it was, there was a couple times where we lost because the teams were, TTO teams were better and really put stuff together. And it just keeps it really exciting. One of your longtime 4x4 people, Martin Rooney.
Yes.
He going to continue?
He was planning to retire after 2020.
Okay.
But I don't know whether he would do whether he would like to do one more year. And I mean, Martin's wonderful. I actually, you may recall, I actually wrote a piece about him called the Rooney Rule.
Yes.
The Rooney Rule is, if you've got Martin Rooney in the relay team, you're going to do better.
Yes.
And see, Martin is one of those interesting people who would never have been absolutely world class as an individual runner. But put him in the last leg against somebody faster, and Martin will just tuck in behind the faster runner and probably take him on the last bend.
Oh, yeah. No, I always teased him about being an 800-meter guy, We were in, Stockholm a couple years ago, and we had a pint, and I just looked at him and said, when are you going to run the 800? And he said, well, I was supposed to all along. I said, I told him he looked like Fiascanero, the South African 800-meter record holder. He's just got the perfect body for it, too. But I love watching him run a relay. As you said, he very seldom makes the wrong move.
Yeah. But going back to the British approach to relays, it means 2 things. If you have a medal target to keep your funding of 7 medals, if you can pick up 3 or 4 of them in the relays, you're in a great position.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what happened, if you recall, in London 2017, where I think, Mo Farah got his 2 medals, and everyone else was struggling. And then suddenly we pick up 4 relay medals.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, it's the downside of the British system is, for a lot of last year, Rhys Pressod was the fastest British 100-meter runner.
Sure.
But he was not in the relay squad.
Wow.
Because he was not prepared to do all the relay camps. He said, look, I want to win an individual medal, and going on relay camps will get in the way of it.
Who is he coached by?
I cannot remember. I wonder if it's a Jonas, but I'm not absolutely sure on that.
And is John Regis his manager?
I don't know that either.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've seen. I like Rhys. He's done some fun interviews when we were at the indoor and some of the outdoor stuff. He's got a very good sense of humor. Quite talented. So, in order for them to get funding, they have to go to all the camps, correct?
If you're funded a relay, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
When an athlete loses funding, that makes a big hullabaloo in The Guardian and a few other places.
Yeah.
Is there a method for them to get their funding back?
Well, I mean, it's arbitrary, because the committee that decides basically says, do we think that this athlete is a serious medal contender at the next Olympics? And of course, that's a very subjective thing.
Yeah.
And then the question of how many do you actually want, because I think we had something like 27 people funded for relays. But then, to be fair, if you look at the women's sprint relay, in 2012, home Olympics, we did not have a relay squad.
Yeah.
Because what happened was, they had decided that they were going to get their qualifying time at the European Championships, and then they got DQ'd, and there wasn't time to have another shot at being in the top 16 or whatever it is in the world.
Yeah.
But to go from 2012 not having it to start winning medals in Moscow 2013, Beijing 2015, London 2017, Rio 2016. I mean, that has been one of the great successes of the British funding.
In the last week since we talked last, John Coates from the Tokyo LOC, organizing committee, I congratulated him on his frankness. And this was right after Thomas Bach, who normally speaks like the Pope. I was raised Catholic, studied to be a Jesuit priest, and I had a couple professors from the Gregorian University in the Vatican, and they always told me that a perfectly written letter by the Pope pleased the liberals as well as the conservatives. You didn't really know what the heck the Pope was saying, It was that what would I call it, bureaucratese. And Thomas Bach normally hides behind that. He's very good at it. In the last week, both he and Coates said, look, if the Olympics can't be held in 2021, that's not going to happen. To my best estimates, the Japanese government and sponsors have put in about $12 billion into Tokyo.
Yes.
It's going to be another $1 billion to hold it off for a year. How can they afford not to do it?
Well, I don't think they can afford not to do it. But equally, isn't the Olympic motto faster, higher, stronger?
Yeah.
And if the COVID virus is still around, can you think of a faster way of spreading it, making it grow stronger, than to have 15,000 people from 200 countries coming and living close together?
I just don't. Yeah, I mean, it's like the biological warfare person's dream, you know?
Yes.
And it's over here, probably tomorrow they'll announce that the U.S. has hit 100,000 deaths. And I follow the CDC and Johns Hopkins and Cornell. And in fact, a couple epidemiologists have told me that it's probably 50% less than what it should be because of the way they have to put the numbers together.
Yeah.
So we know this is a grave thing. And I remember my grandfather, who was in a ship coming back from Normandy at the end of 1918, got sick and sat outside of Philadelphia in a boat for 2 months with the Spanish influenza. And he remembered it all his life. You know, he lived to be 85. I don't think any of us ever thought this was going to go this way.
No.
But
no.
It's you're wondering how they're going to change the sport. And then one of my readers sent me a smart note that said, well, come on, Larry, most of our track meets don't have more than 10 people anyway. We're already, physically distancing. And, you chuckle about that, but I wonder how we're going to be able to do this. I'm very curious about the June 11th Oslo meeting,
Yeah.
Are you going to that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. All right.
No, I mean, I first of all, my flight has been cancelled because there are no flights from here.
Wow.
And also, it would be against government recommendation for me to travel.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that happens. But I mean, I asked Joe Coates, the new CEO of British Athletics,
sure,
about Gateshead, and Birmingham now moved to Gateshead. I said to her, "Will that go ahead without spectators?" And she said, "No. Economically, it makes no sense because at the moment we're next month we're likely to have soccer being resuming with no spectators." But as she said, they have such big TV contracts that paying spectators probably contribute 5 to 10% of the income generated. TV and other commercial deals being the main. But she said for athletics we don't have that, and so if we can't sell tickets and have a full stadium, it won't work. But of course, that at a time when British Athletics has lost money on the World Cup event, for them to lose the anniversary games, which was a good money spinner, and to lose their other Diamond League, is a bit problematic.
I'm going to bring up a name from UKA past, Niels de Vos, who's now headed up. He's gone from one nightmare to another. He's now in Eugene, Oregon, part-time. My guess he's there full-time now, dealing with Eugene 2022. How is he perceived in the UK?
I think that when he and Ed Warner, the chairman, worked together, they were perceived to be a good team.
Okay.
Some people would say that Warner deserved most of the credit.
Okay.
And I have heard De Vos criticized over the, I believe that the World Cup lost $1 million. I've heard that figure, and I've seen him blamed for that. But I don't know to what extent that it's fair to blame him or not. I mean, I've always found him a very helpful man. I got to know him a little bit during London 2017, and in fact, I saw him in Dubai at the IPC Disability Athletics in November.
Mm-hmm. We got about 4 minutes left. Are there any topics that you would like to address this week that are near and dear to your heart?
Well, one of the things that I'm quite fascinated by is just how athletes are coping with the situation.
Sure.
And I mean, it seems that some are trying to keep training as if nothing had happened. And I know, Danielle Williams, for example, told me that her coach had basically said, look, just forget it. When lockdown's over, we'll restart. Just try and keep yourself fit, but there's nothing we can do at the moment.
Yeah.
And again, if I talk to athletes, I ask them how likely it is that any of these diamond leagues will actually happen. And, some of them seem very hopeful, very optimistic, but then a lot of them have lost a lot of income by not being able to compete.
Sure.
But it's such a strange situation, and particularly for those who are sort of past 30 and who don't have many years left.
Yeah.
To suddenly find you're losing this year and potentially to lose next year at the Olympics. I mean, hey, Lara, isn't it a great idea? Why don't we all go to China and have the world indoors there?
Sure. I think that sounds great. And I'm just going to stay for the 2022 Olympics too, because that's going to be a load of fun too. Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, it's and certainly, I mean, our government has done brilliantly at putting money into making the economy, stopping the economy from collapsing and keeping people in work. But the funny thing about borrowing money is you have to pay it back.
Yes.
And you see, our government has been very generous in funding sport, and people are saying, well, actually, over the next few years, will that money be available?
Yeah.
Will all the sports, including track and field, lose their funding? Will the money that currently funds individual athletes, will that continue or not? So there's so many things that I think this pandemic will be dealing with it and its effects for years.
Yeah, no, I think we're going to have a legacy from this that we just don't know yet. With that, my dear friend, we are going to be ending our second athletics chat. And until next week at this time, have a great week. Stay safe and healthy. I hope you can do a little bit of golf safely. But I will be posting your stories later today. And Stuart, thanks again.
Okay, my pleasure.
All right, this is Larry Eder with RunBlogRun and Stuart Weir, and we are solving all of the athletics world's problems on Athletic Chat 2. Talk to you soon. Fans, Larry Eder, RunBlogRun. This is Athletics Chat 2 Epilogue. We had time with our friend again, Stuart Weir, from across the pond, and we covered several topics. Started out with a salute to Jesse Owens, today's 85th anniversary. That's it. May 25th, 1935. He set 4 world records in 45 minutes. He equaled the 100-yard dash of 9.4. He went 8.13 meters in the long jump. A record of state. It was a world record at the time. His school record wasn't broken until a couple years ago. Pretty amazing, huh? Then he did a 200 220-yard straight in 20.06. And then he went 22.6 in the 220-yard hurdles. Pretty impressive afternoon. And there's a piece up on RunBlogRun we linked to from Chris Turner, the director of Athletics Heritage at World Athletics in Monaco. And as some of you know, Chris Turner is a huge track geek. He was the press manager for World Athletics for a long time. Before that, he was a freelance journalist. I met him back in 1995. We geeked out on Finnish javelins and stuff. And a few years ago, he was trying to get me to go to the Finn versus Sweden event. And I'm going to have to take him up on that again because I want to see. That's one of the oldest meets in the world, and a great tradition with Finns and Swedes duking it out, and a lot of athletes doing 3 or 4 events. Kind of cool. But today, Stuart and I talked about a few things. We talked about relay funding in the UK, which is done differently than in the US. They have a team, I think it's about 24 men and women that are funded for the relay teams, and they have to go to all the relay camps. They have to go to the scheduled events. And athletes such as Reese Prescott, the top sprinter last year, weren't included in that because he said it affected his ability to win an individual medal. UK has done pretty darn well in the 4x1 and the 4x4 in the past 4 or 5 years. So they have a system that seems to work. We also talked about the challenges of having coaches and how it's different in the UK and in the US. In the US, most athletes have a coach as a high schooler, then they have a different coach in college. They may keep the same coach as a pro. They may not have a coach, or they may go to a professional coach if they're an elite athlete. In the UK, a lot of people stay with the same coaches. Dean Asher Smith, for example, has had the same coach, John Blackie, since she was about 11 years old. And John's pretty special in that he is known for celebrating the successes of a young age grouper as well as his European double champion. And I think that's kind of cool. Stuart and I also tried to solve a few other problems today. Let's see. We talked about how Tokyo cannot afford to have the Olympics, but how do we believe it will be? Right now, I see it as this huge Petri dish with 10,000 athletes and 11,000 media people. And even if you cut that down, you're going to just send the disease everywhere. So how do you do this? And we chuckled a little bit about going to World Indoor Champs in China next year. And I said, well, I'll be quarantined perhaps since I can stay for the 2022 Olympics too. I think everything up till 2024, maybe past then, is going to be affected. This is changing our life. It's not a communist plot. It's not something from aliens. There are real issues, and you have to dig a little bit to get to the truth. That's the scary thing right now, and that's really difficult. And I ask people to stay safe, to keep social distancing, to wash your hands, wear a mask in closed areas, outside, wear a mask when you're around a crowd. Just be careful. And it's not so much you getting sick, it's the people around you too. And people like me, I'm a poster child. So I've got to be extra careful. I'm in a lovely little small town in Wisconsin. I'm flying out to California in a few days, and I'm going to have to be by myself a lot. So, c'est la vie. Let's get back to the Olympics and stop my pontificating. So we talked about whether the Olympics can actually be held next year. I think that both the LOC spokesperson, John Coates, and Thomas Bach, I call him the Pope of the Olympics, the IOC president, were very clear this week that if it's not going to happen in 2021, Tokyo Olympics is probably not going to happen. And that's sad because I think they would have hosted a magnificent Olympics, but there's much more to it than this. This is life and death for a lot of people. And if you take just the media and the athletes, bring them into Tokyo, and then send them back out again, you're going to have something wrong unless we have a vaccine. And let's keep our thoughts and prayers together. I heard today on The Guardian that American pharmaceutical companies turned down a proposal from European Union to even develop a vaccine back in 2017. So a lot of politics, a lot of craziness, a lot of money, unfortunately. And all I can think of is my grandfather, who was 19, actually more than 19. God, what was he? Oh, he was 26 in 1918. And when he on his way back from World War I, he contracted the Spanish influenza, and he was in a boat or in a ship for about 4 or 5 weeks. And it was something he remembered 7 years later when he told me the story. I was 15 years old, just listening to everything my grandpa said. And it affected him. And these are going to be things that you're going to be telling your families for a long time to come. So please be careful. Enjoy athletics. Where's it going to go? I applaud World Athletics, as does Stuart, for planning a season. Stuart's been asking athletes if they think it's going to happen or not. Some say they can't see how it can happen. Others say they hope some meets do go on. I do know right now that Stuart will not be able to cover Oslo live because he can't even leave the UK, and there's no flights to Oslo from where he's at. So that's the challenge too. So we're going to have to see how this thing plays out. But this was another fun week with Athletics Chat 2. I thank you for watching and listening to the thoughtful BOMOs from Stuart Weir to my questions and, of course, my pontificating. Stay safe, exercise, love your families, talk to people every day. It's really important. Eat well, wash your hands for 20 seconds, okay? And keep your exercise going, but do it safely. Larry Eater, RunBlogRun, signing off.